Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Verticals. I'm Luke Sophinos, I'm in the founder seat.
Welcome back everyone, I'm Nick and I'm a VC.
Awesome. We're going to dive right into this week's Vertical Pulse. We got a bunch of great topics and we got a fantastic vertical titan coming on here shortly. I'm actually going to hold back on telling you who it is until he shows up. So keep the suspense alive. Yeah.
I love it.
So let's start on this week's Vertical Pulse. I think Nick's got our first topic here, so let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is a piece some of you may have seen. It was published by our friends over at Menlo Ventures. The title here is AI's UI problem is actually a new era of software. I think as everyone listening is familiar with LLMs and what they allow, where their strengths lie, and that's really, if you think about it, that's text, that's voice, that's content generation, new modalities, right? If you compare what that enables to historically, what SaaS encompassed. So, checkboxes, drop downs, a whole new UI to learn. What we're seeing is kind of a different face of software in this post LLM world. So can you interact with your software or your platform, your solution via voice? Can you interact just via natural language text? And so what this piece goes through is just really what that enables. They go through really three eras of enterprise software, right? The traditional system of record, a system of engagement that's really focused more on, intuitive UI and natural language. And then finally, systems of work that are just fully integrated and you don't even have to worry about, hey, do I have to go in and enter something in a kind of data object or whatever. So I think what's the overall takeaway here is we look at some of these, kind of solutions that are coming out that are AI native. There is less, it more naturally folds into someone's workflow. And as a result, there is less friction of adoption, right? So especially if you think about the perspective of a vertical user. So let's say you run, a dentist practice or a veterinary clinic or a retail store. You don't have time day to day to sit around and say, hey, let's figure out how to use a new solution every week. My dad was a doctor. I know with his practice, he said, I can't change practice management systems more than every couple of years because it's a huge training undertaking, right? So I think the overall takeaway and what Luke, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on is, are we seeing UI change in a way that makes software solutions, AI native software solutions, easier to adopt and therefore are growing the market opportunity?
Yeah, this article reminds me a lot of Dave from Tidemark's post on the system of action. I mean, look, I think I always try to look at these things from the customer seat, right? And so you brought up your dad in the dentist category. Looking from the customer vantage point, what has happened with software sprawl is a horrible customer experience, right? So it's the more buttons, the more things to click, the more things to learn, especially when you look at the service company that all of us are providing software to. The software is not supposed to be a pain in the ass. It's not supposed to be there to click a bunch of buttons and fill out a bunch of text and make sure your system of record or your CRM is up to date. Like nobody likes doing that. And so, I kind of think about this as like how it's taken actually quite a long time for this to evolve into something that's very simple that you can just talk to or type to, and it actually takes action on your behalf. And so that's very complicated, but I think the holy grail here is almost kind of like what Uber did, right? It made it so simple. You tap a couple buttons and you get a car and right at your doorstep. And I think if vertical software layers or vertical software founders can think in that regard, is obviously that you're doing a ton of highly complicated things to make that experience so incredible and magical and there's no friction involved or very little. That's the holy grail. And so, I like where you're going with this. I think we all need to do a better job of thinking about, how can we have an agent that somebody can just talk to and it fills out the CRM and it does the manual, click the checkbox work that no service provider actually enjoys doing.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think the primitives are already there, right? I mean, look, I don't know if you use Granola, like a note taker, a scribe, but between that and my email and decks we receive, right, that's about 90% of the information that goes into our CRM. Even still today, I largely have to enter it myself, right? So I think the the lift of maintaining a system of record, or whatever we call that in the future, system of action, system of engagement, is coming down. That's my takeaway.
I like it. All right, I got one for you here. So a company called Extend just raised a round that I wanted to talk about. So Extend is a provider of spend management software for banks. And I don't want to zoom too far in on Extend. I want to zoom out a second and talk a little bit about Brex and Ramp, who obviously sit in the horizontal category. But I think it's really interesting. I believe Ramp just raised was it $39 billion valuation recently. And, very focused on spend management, on kind of financial AI agents, right? A lot of startup founders are using Brex or Ramp. I use Brex at my business, but I've seen more and more over the last few years, vertical specific Brex and Ramp businesses. There's another company that's doing this in the healthcare space called Nitra. I've seen a few in construction. And so I'm curious to get your take from the investor seat on the verticalization of Brex and Ramp, and and specifically with AI, becoming a key element in some of these businesses. Some of them are AI native businesses that are doing this. Like, what's your view there? Are we going to see that happen across a bunch of different industries?
I think so. I mean, my personal view is look, the reality is not all software has to be vertical. And in a lot of cases, a vertical approach can be better. But, if we're just talking about, general expenses and, kind of employee charge cards and things like that, I don't think necessarily. But when you have, what vertical markets provide is great surface area for building specialization and defensibility. So, and let's take construction, for example, right? You have a couple great companies out there that, offer this for lenders or to give it to their developers. And there are really unique considerations there because, you've got to figure out, what are you going to buy? Where are you in the process? Is that going to be validated for your lender? Things like that, which are very vertical specific, and Ramp is never going to build that. That's where I think we can see these platforms really gain purchase, is where there is vertical differentiation. So I guess my answer is kind of mixed. I think you will see it in some categories where that exists, and others where they're just taking Ramp and trying to sell it into a particular vertical. Maybe the need isn't there. I don't know, Luke. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think there are definitely verticals where the workflow and the process is very different than your classic spend management. And I think all those verticals are really being serviced today by, they don't even know what Brex or Ramp is. So just the virtual card to them is an innovation. So yeah, it's going to depend on the specific industry, but if there are key workflows or a bunch of suppliers, right, that you can leverage from group purchasing capabilities to drive down prices, and you competing against the Bank of America credit card that the Main Street Service business is using, that sucks, right?
Right.
I think it's interesting.
Plus, I mean, here's another maybe parting thought is, let's say you offer a larger platform, whether that's for financial management or other aspects of the business. Maybe that allows you to offer better terms on the fintech, right? Whether that's, interest rates on a bank account or perks on the card, but, that can be a loss leader for a larger business, right? You don't want to compete against Visa ultimately. You want to compete against software. So that's a super interesting one though.
Have you guys done anything at your fund? Have you invested in anything in that or adjacent to that category?
I don't know. No, I don't think we've done anything quite yet where the card was kind of the leading wedge. We have seen that as kind of a later on product, but we have looked at things and are actively looking at things in that space. And again, I think it's hard for that to be your standalone product because that's not probably where you're going to build differentiation. But, as part of a larger offering, if that's a core part of the day-to-day workflow in that world, absolutely.
All right. I'll pull up the next one.
Yeah, let's move on to the next. So, we have a piece here, by Janelle Tang. She writes some great stuff. If you guys haven't come across her Substack, it's Next Big Tang. Love the title. This piece is Much Ado About Margins, the grossly overhyped AI gross margin debate. And really where this comes from, many of you may have seen Bessemer's State of AI Report 2025. This in the in the tradition of Eileen at Cowboys unicorn nomenclature. They've introduced some new ones for the AI era. So supernovas, shooting stars, that really just kind of try to capture the profile of some of these extremely fast growing AI native businesses, vertical and otherwise. But Janelle was talking about in this piece is really the question of gross margins. So AI native software businesses, or just AI businesses as we're all calling them, they have lower gross margins, right? And part of that certainly is inference, the cost of inference. So we have a new infrastructure layer in foundation models, and every time you want to kind of whatever it is, generate your content or analyze your audio, you've got to pay for that in the same way that you pay for AWS for computer storage. Now, early on, that can be fairly costly. The question really Janelle grapples with here is, how does that margin profile scale? And how does that align with the sort of valuations that, AI native businesses are getting today? Now, on the latter piece, just hit that, obviously, and Luke, there's a kind of bar chart a little bit further down in AI valuations, but, these businesses are getting incredible valuations. Now, early stage venture, it's not always based on multiples in terms of how companies are valued. We all know that. But I think the ultimate bet you would have to be making is, one, either businesses can increase these margins over time, whether that's getting volume scale on your inference costs, whether that is automating human in the loop aspects that maybe the LLMs didn't cover to start, and or that the market opportunity is so much bigger that it doesn't matter that there's maybe 10 or 20 points lower margin at steady state. I guess maybe one final thing I'll layer on here, and then Luke, I want to get your take on this margin question. I was having a conversation with Jake Saber over at Emergence, who made a really interesting point that I think is relevant here, which is these businesses are growing so quickly, and VCs are investing earlier and earlier because they want to get in front of the winners, right? But as a result, we haven't really had as many cycles. And let's say at a Series A, the company, let's say they went from 0 to 10 and they're raising a $50 million Series A or 30. You haven't really had cycles of, churn and retention. You haven't really been able to see what is the customer success cost going to be. And so in a weird way, Jake was saying this hypergrowth almost introduces more risk. And I think that's very true of margins. You don't really know, where margins are going to land. So, I mean, Luke, how does this hit you?
Yeah. So I think every VC, or at least most of them, is just assuming that the margin problem is going to get figured out and resolved, and the price will go down over time, as it did in, with every kind of major new technology that's come out. And I think that's probably right. But 25% margin for if you were a SaaS company pre-AI with 25% margin, you'd be untouchable. No one would even invest in the business. The payments guys have gotten hammered in the public markets on valuations because they're sitting at 40 to 60% margins. So, look, do I think that this gets resolved over time? Yes. But, I'm looking at this chart right now, and Sierra raised at 225 times revenue. So there's got to be some sort of, yes, will it come down? I think that's right. But we can't pay crazy. You got to be at least somewhat price conscious if you're in the investor seat. At least that's my take. So that's the first point. The second point, and this is really around stickiness, is I think a lot of the AI companies, specifically the horizontal AI companies that are built on top of, other businesses, LLMs, what they don't talk about is they have horrible retention. Horrible. They're using an ARR number, and they're just taking this month's revenue and timesing it by 12. And, what that's missing is, we went from 0 to 100 million in 30 days or whatever the craziness that we're seeing on X. But I want to see a true cohort analysis of how this looks over time. And, again, that it comes back to the why I believe, and I think you share this belief with me, that the future is vertical, because you may not see that growth rate, although we have seen it with open evidence in healthcare, which is incredible. And that's been historically a brutal market to to scale in. But I think even if you're not growing as fast as some of these quote unquote supernovas, as Bessemer calls them, retention is the lifeblood of SaaS. Jason Lemkin has been screaming that, from the rooftop for years, and I agree with him. And so if you're a founder and you're really focused on the growth rate, that's great. You should be, but you got to remember that retention is as important as growth. And that's my view.
100%. 100%. I think ultimately, if you look at open evidence, I think Harvey is maybe not as good of an example, or Magic School. These are all businesses that have built up really impressive adoption numbers, right? So I think for the first two, Harvey and Open Evidence, they've got kind of a third of their overall user base, whether that's big law in the case of Harvey, or in the case of Open Evidence, physicians, got a third of all of them, quote unquote, using it. Magic School has 80% of US school districts using it. This is consumer-like adoption. But let's think back to consumer businesses, right? Their retention just doesn't look anything like B2B SaaS. And so, I think that's a real push and pull we should all pay attention to.
100%. I'm with you. All right. Let's jump to the last one here, and then we'll get our guest on the horn, who's a killer, by the way. I'm excited for everyone to meet him. So Meta recently dropped these new AR glasses. We've been hearing about AR and all the buzz around augmented reality forever. These are the first glasses that don't look bulky and like painful, and if you wore them around in public, you'd be looked at like an alien. And so they're really good looking. They come with a wristband, which is how I think they've made them not as bulky as everything else. They partnered with Ray-Ban. I'm excited about these. Like, I almost pulled the trigger on the Apple ones, and then I stopped myself, which I'm glad I did, because I feel like they're in everybody's, drawer somewhere now. But my question for you, Nick, is, and my brain was spinning a little bit on this one, is number one, is this finally going to open the gates to, widespread adoption? And number two, what are some kind of rapid fire, like vertical AI businesses, vertical software businesses where you could build a company on top of these?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, because I think over the period that you and I, Luke, have been in around the software world, there have probably been 3 different hype cycles around AR/VR, right? Or metaverse, whatever it's being called in any given time. And I think the challenge is always that you need the hardware, you need consensus on the hardware in order for the software to flourish, right? So, if folks have used what's Apple's product on this, their AR hardware, I forget the name of it for some reason.
Apple Glass is supposedly going to be the glasses, but I can't remember what the one before is.
Right. So I think the challenge with it is, like, these things are very expensive to manufacture, and therefore they can't be widely adopted just yet. So they may be used in certain enterprise use cases, but without that kind of larger access, there's not really that much support for the development ecosystem, and it's just hard. So I think this is one of those technology jumps in which at some point, we're going to be able to, compact all of the electronics and actually come up with a great wearable form factor, and then the ecosystem can flourish. Whether this will be it, I have no idea, but I think there's no shortage of use cases. And frankly, there are already businesses that are offering services today that could just adopt this platform, right? You see a lot of them and certainly healthcare is one, although probably in more niche use cases like actual surgery. But ag is another. I think they even had a picture on there of someone like looking at a tomato. Certainly supply chain. So you think about like pick and pack, and I think they're pretty widespread use cases. It's anywhere you have, call it field workers or workers who are doing their job on their feet, this could be relevant.
I love the quote that the hardware has to be consensus for the software to follow. I think that's right on the money. Do you remember Magic Leap? Right? Magic Leap had crazy hype, tons of money raised, and then they, it didn't really work out. They brought in a new CEO, Peggy Johnson, who was, formerly Qualcomm, then moved to Microsoft, then moved to Magic Leap. And her promise, I thought, made a ton of sense, which was, let's move this to enterprise and let's focus on blue collar training, I believe. And if I totally agree with this notion that there's this huge class of the US workforce and the global workforce that hasn't had the power of the internet really prevalent in their day-to-day work, right? So people that are working on machines that are, using their hands. And so once we get consensus on the hardware, I think there's going to be a huge amount of companies that pop up that can really support this. So it's very exciting.
All right, everyone. We are super excited to bring on Jack Greco today as our guest. We are going to be chopping it up on his background as a co-founder of ACV Auctions and now the founder of Greco VC. So with that, Jack, why don't you share just with the audience a little bit on you, your background, and how you got interconnected with our theme today, which is AI marketplaces, and we can take it from there.
Cool. Well, nice to meet everybody. I haven't done one of these in a little while, so hopefully the rust gets kicked off quick. So yeah, I was one of the co-founders of ACV Auctions. It was a B2B wholesale automotive marketplace that we started back in 2014, which feels like it was like generations ago at this point, now that I see what's coming out today. I always joke, like, what took us forever to build with ACV, you could probably give a kid with a case of Mountain Dew in a weekend, he could probably build something even better than what we had for our first couple of years. So no knock on our developers. It's just amazing how fast and how quickly things change. The reason I'm here, Nick, is actually I think you cold called me at some point a long time ago when you were getting Euclid going, and you were like, yo,
sounds right,
we should talk. And we built a friendship, and I'm now happily an LP in your fund, and I get to, jam with you on stuff like this. So it's cool. So happy to go wherever you want with it.
Cool, man. Why don't we start, if cool by you, let's start with the early days of ACV Auctions. So, a lot of our listeners are founders, probably a good amount of them thinking about marketplaces or marketplace-like models. I'd just be curious to kind of go back to those early days and like how you thought about the marketplace dynamics then and how it just evolved over the first couple of years.
Yeah. I think it's important to realize I'm not a car guy. I'm an American guy that likes cars, but I didn't grow up in the industry. And so, you'll get a mix between founders, specifically with marketplaces that grew up in industry and then grew up outside of it. I grew up outside of it. I didn't grow up outside the mechanisms of marketplaces. My dad was a dealer. He was an antique dealer, right? Which meant the word wholesale was something he had used at times. He was a trader in terms of traded stuff between people. We went to a lot of auctions when I was a kid. So the mechanisms I understood, the content I didn't, right? So just take that into consideration when you consider my point of view. So, early days of ACV, right? I actually remember when I was in high school, me and my buddies sneaking into automotive auctions because we just thought it was cool, right? There was one about an hour and a half south of us in a place called Dansville, New York. I grew up in a little farm town called Canandaigua. And, you go there, it'd be cool. It's just such an Americana culture, chewing tobacco, cigarettes, guys barking at each other, pants falling down. So there's butt cracks out everywhere, right? It just smelled like gas and oil and like everything an 18-year-old loved. And so, fast forward to 30 when I met Joe and Dan and we decided to start this, I had that memory, that recollection in my brain. And I remember marketplaces like, I always look at I'm an economist by trade, right? So I look at the tax on everything, right? I look at the way what the market tells me, and it did make a lot of sense. I was like, you got dealers take cars in on trade. And when they take a car in on trade, their money gets tied up in it. And I knew from
Jack, what does that mean for even less car listeners?
Yeah, or everyone that lives in New York and San Francisco and doesn't own a car. If you have a nice enough car, when you go to buy a new one, you trade it into the dealer, right? You're like, hey, I got this 2019 and I want to buy a brand new 2025. And instead of, for the customer, they don't want that car. There's a reason they probably want to get rid of it. They also are buying the second most expensive asset that they'll probably ever buy outside of their house. And so they have to think about where the money is going to come from. So people trade their car in. In states where there's sales tax on new purchases, like New York, people love trading it in because it actually cuts down the amount of which you actually get taxed. You buy a brand new $40,000 car, you trade in a $10,000 car, you're only paying tax on the $30,000 difference. I don't have to worry about selling it. It's gone. Good dealerships give like a good experience. It's just part of buying a car. And at the time we started, I think there were like 30 million cars that got traded into dealers every year. So franchise dealers. This is a dealer that says Toyota or Ford or GM or whatever, right? This isn't Jack's Auto Barn down on the corner of, whatchamacallit Street, right? With a barbed wire on the top of the chain link fence. Those are independent dealers. So these cars got traded in, and then dealers, my dad, just because of the business he was in, our store was on a road where, we had a dealership right next door. Patrick Pontiac Buick GMC, I remember. And I got to know this guy over there, again, remembering back to, my teenage years and my early 20s. And I remember they're like any other business, right? Like you think these car dealers are rich, but they're not. They're all run a business in cash flow manners. So when you got somebody that has a business that's trading in very expensive capital assets and they have money tied up, dealers need to free that cash up to go run their business, pay their payroll, pay for all those wonderful ads that we've seen on TV throughout our childhood and adulthood, And so they had to get rid of them. So, I might trade in my 2019 car when I buy a new 2025. The 2019 car, if it doesn't get retailed, which it usually does about a third of the time on a dealer's lot, the dealer picks up the phone and calls another dealer and tries to get him to buy it. Same way my dad was like trying to buy and sell antiques. Or they would take it to a physical auction. There was literally a place that looked like, it would be like, they could be a 2-bay garage. It could be all the way up to like a 20-bay, it looks like a transfer station for like goods. There's just a place where people bring cars, usually once a week. They get auctioned off with an auctioneer, like, hey, right? Like the guys that say that it literally was there with a gavel. The car would roll into the lane, 60 seconds, people would bid on it. It would either sell or it wouldn't sell and would roll out. It just seemed busted. I was like, this is 2015. I mean, it's not today where like your phone's literally buying you toilet paper when you scream at your wife asking where the toilet paper is. But it was a point when you could trust buying stuff on the internet, right? And, when Joe originally had the concept, it went through a lot of versions. But the idea was like, we should be able to buy stuff, instead of having our laptop, like the one I'm talking to you on right now, we should be able to buy stuff from our phone. And used car dealers, this is the only way they can get inventory is to buy it at auction typically. So we just got to make it easier. New car dealers want to get rid of the cars. Used car dealers want to buy the cars. Let's just make it as easy as possible. And we took a really buyer-centric approach to this because we knew that if we could secure supply and we had this kind of like rabid, starving, demand base, that the marketplace would just start working. So we did. We built, which if you look at the very first version of ACV, literally looks like something you could probably make on one of these no-code systems in like a couple hours. It was a picture of the car. We just literally had a text box and wrote like, this is what's right with it. This is what's wrong with it. And there were just buttons. You could bid $100 or you could like set your price and people would just bid on things. And it was almost like gamified it a little and put it on top of the phone. Look, early days, there is a lot that goes on. Like we were not, I still do not believe ACV even currently should be considered a technology company. It is a tech-enabled service business that has a field service aspect to it more than it does like a deep tech play, right? We've taken the exact same mechanisms that happened in auctions for centuries, and we just were one of the first. We were one of 5 companies that started within like a 1-year period. We were one of the first that really went mobile first with it. And we were one of the first that took the whole process of figuring out, like everybody had to do their own diagnosis on every single car. We were like, this is silly. We'll send our own guy out. He'll look at the car and then we'll stand behind whatever he says. So now everybody, for the first time, it was a flattening of the information. Everybody had the same info. And they now knew that most used car owners were the ones that went and bought it because they couldn't quote unquote trust anybody. But now they could trust us because if we were wrong, we were going to put our money where our mouth was. If we said this car runs and drives great and you got it and didn't shift into second gear, that was on ACV. That was no longer on that employee who what you pay him is the amount that car costs. You would have to pay him for 12 months to pay him the amount that you just bought that car for. And it's not on yourself, so it's alleviation in your time. So we made it easy to buy stuff, and we kind of fixed all the uncertainties and surfaced all that information, which, again, made it even easier to buy and also lowered the risk of purchasing. We call them snowflake assets. Every single one's different, So
Yep.
it was the long answer. Sorry about that, but
No, can I dumb it down for a second?
Yeah.
Just for me trying to get a good experience or understanding of it. So you basically have I go in, I trade in my car.
Yep.
You said something interesting, which is a third of the trade-ins actually get resold at the dealership.
Yep.
At retail wise.
Yep.
So the other 2/3 are those. That's before you guys existed. That's I'm picking up a phone and I'm just calling my network of people and saying, "Hey, I got this car. Come get it off my hands."
So a third got sold the deal, and these are very round numbers, and these are from a decade
understood.
ago. Okay. A third of the cars, I was like, "Hey, I'm a Toyota dealer. This is a 3-year-old Camry. I'll clean it up. I'll sell it on my lot." Okay. A third of the car is I'm a Ford dealer and I just took a Silverado and no effing way that I'm putting that on my lot. But my buddy, in the South towns will buy it. So I'll sell it to him and he'll be able to retail it. Right. The last third was, well, I don't know anybody. Maybe it's an older car. It's got issues. I'll send it to auction. And those are the ones destined for primarily used car dealers, independent used car dealers. So think of it as a third of 10 million, 10 million, 10 million, right? And those physical auctions, the last third, the last 10 million, they were operating, maybe that number was 12 million or something else, doesn't matter. The point is they were operating across the United States. There were two big players, Mannheim and Odessa. When we literally took a map and we did Mannheim in blue, Odessa in red, and we just kind of put dots where they all were, and it literally looked like a political map, right? There were red states, there were blue states, and there were purple states. And but that was it. It was a two-party system, right? And because they both had made so much money so long as there's enough healthy competition between them to keep number 3 from showing up, they were going to split the pie. Who knew who was going to, Mannheim was always bigger than Odessa, but they were the biggest players, right? And that's the world we entered into, being in. And so we made the argument. We said, this is silly. Physical auctions run your car gets to run across the auction block one time a week. And if it doesn't sell, you got to physically move it and then hope to run it somewhere else or wait the week. We're like, we'll run it. If it doesn't sell, we'll run it again in 4 hours. Who cares? Doesn't have to move. And if it sits on your lot and somebody happens to come and want to buy it retail, it's not gone. You don't have the opportunity cost, right? There was physical auctions. We dubbed the term soul consignment. You have to give that car. It needs to go to somebody else, and then they have the consignment on that vehicle to sell it. It's physically gone, right? It's really hard to call an auction being like, hey, I actually have somebody here that wants a 9-year-old Jetta, which I know I sent you and it's going on the block tomorrow. Send it back. Like, that doesn't happen, right? So it also allowed us to, we found out the days they were coming to pick up the cars. Let's say they picked up cars for auctions on Tuesdays and Fridays. We'd make sure we showed up Monday and Thursday, right? And we're like, okay, we want to see them first. And it was a really easy sale. There was no enterprise contract. There was no negotiating. It was, can I go give you a couple numbers on your cars? And they're like, sure. We went. Again, we did have a dealer's license, so it wasn't, we were, the proxy for these people bidding on our platform. We would load the cars ourselves. We would get them up there. We'd ask them ahead of time, what do you want for this car? I want 12. And then, there's the 12. That's ridiculous. MMR, which is like a trade book, says it's 11.5, blah, blah, blah. And you knew that they were always bullshitting with you. So there was a human version of it. We go outside. It was a 20-minute auction. So you could go launch like 3 cars in an hour, go get something to eat, wait for them to sell, wait for them to get bid up, come back and be like, here's the numbers I got. Do you want to sell them? They're like, wow, you just sold those? We're like, yeah. I remember we used to, I would carry a checkbook on the rare occasion I would do it. And I would just write them a check and be like, here you go. When it cashes, I'll come pick them up. They're like, wow, this is real. It's so easy to make somebody a believer. These weren't the reasons why. We weren't like, let's build a business where there's no contract. Like, we didn't look at it that way. These were just natural, dumb luck things that came from the way we built the product, that once we realized we were doing it, then all of a sudden we just did it a lot more. And that's how the company grew so quick.
Got it. And the shifting of liability piece too is probably just another example of that, where it sounds like it became, hey, I give this to these guys, now it's on them, versus the auctioneer calling back and being like, you gave me a piece of shit car.
It's lower the threshold of access, right? So it's easier to access this stuff. increase the amount of information so I can make a better buying decision, and then reinforce a guarantee on the back end of how, like, you could now transfer your trust to somebody else because there wasn't that big of a, like, if I trusted you and you failed, it was actually better if you told, if ACV said that this car runs and drives right and it doesn't, than if I went myself and I thought it did and it doesn't run right. So now you got people being like, I'd rather buy it on ACV. If the same diagnosis I give, the ACV rep gives, and they're wrong, and that diagnosis is wrong, ACV is going to pay me in one case, but I'm just going to be left holding the bag in the other. I would rather buy all my stuff on ACV. So you started to see these buyers that are like, I only buy on ACV. They would retool their business because they started growing these businesses outside of a solution for the risk that would normally exist with being wrong on a vehicle assessment. So it fundamentally changed the way, like, used car dealers, if they became committed and devout to, and this is for online platforms in general, I thought we had the best, the most comprehensive, the highest guarantee. But that's what made such a swift migration over to digital. Was it wasn't that you could bid on your phone, like, that's cool, but you could basically go to any other auction and bid on your computer. The UX wasn't as good. It was that we created this uniform, clear set of information, and then a guarantee that backed it up. I really thought that was the most special thing we did.
But I imagine that must have taken some tech on the back end in order to be able to have confidence in that guarantee, right? Or was that still pretty?
No, I mean, we would train guys, threaten them to high hell that they couldn't screw stuff up, and have them just run through, like, did you walk around the car with a paint meter? You got to remember, if the average car, let's say 40 people looked at a car at a physical auction, and there were, those 40 people each had, how much time would they spend per car? A minute? Who knows? Like, there's at a physical auction, you can't drive the car. They start it. They'll drive it forward, drive it back, turn it off. That's it. You hear it run for like 2 minutes. That's it. Maybe it's a cold start. Maybe it's not. So you got 40 people spending a minute per car. That's 40 minutes of demand time that's there. And then, they got to walk the whole auction. They might be looking at cars for 4 or 5 hours before the auction starts. Well, in 4 hours, if I'm looking at, let's say it's really 2 minutes a car, I'm looking at 30 cars an hour. That's, 60, 120 cars that I look at in 4 hours. I'm exhausted by the end. I don't know what I'm doing either. We would put an inspector out there that would take 20 minutes per car, but one person then share all the info. So now all of a sudden that car got 10 times the amount of minutes that eyeballs were looking at it. It walked through an actual list of things. We were able to do things on the dealership lot. Like, we weren't really supposed to drive them because we weren't insured to, but like, they would drive it around the dealership a couple times saying, we're just trying to find a good place to take a photo to see if we can get into like third gear to make sure it wouldn't slip. Like, so it was way more, hey, assume, and we were getting people, a lot of the guys that were our vehicle condition inspectors were car guys. They were guys that lived at AutoZone and Advanced Auto Parts in Napa and did their own work and probably had detailed businesses in the background. Like, they knew the fundamental nuances. I give Joe, one of my co-founders, a ton of credit. He was a car guy for forever. Like, he knew all the things to look for. We would build databases and be like, okay, Subarus have timing chain issues between 800 and 100,000 or 80 and 100,000 miles. So how do we look for that on this model? Right. That was the kind of stuff. It was like guys walking around with stuff you could have bought from, literally Advanced Auto Parts for $100 worth of tools, spending the time on the car. That was it.
Yep.
And was the business model on day one, was it commission based? So when you sold,
we did not charge anybody anything unless the car sold. We came and did all that for free. That was the point. We could come shoot. We call it shooting, photographing, and doing the CR on them, condition report. We might shoot 100 cars and sell 5 of them the first time. And we're like, okay, selfie is $150 per car at $750. So like, you did all that for $750. And I'd say, no, we did all of that so you realize that we're going to be your partner forever. And we only sold 5 cars today. And that's because you overpriced them. And if you can get the price, we'll come again, but you just, you got to be a little better on the pricing. And over time, we learned how to negotiate, because the truth is nobody knows how to price this asset. This isn't pork bellies or bushels of wheat on the Merc, right? This isn't like a stock on New York Stock Exchange. Everyone's different. So there was a very gentle education process where you had to take used car dealers were probably wildly insecure people because their egos, the defense around their ego was massive. You had to say, yes, you know everything. You do. But if you want to sell this car, look at how many people looked at it. We made it very clear. Here's how many people looked at it. Here's how many bid on it. Here's how many went through photos. We didn't lie to people. We said, this is how many people are on the other side. So this is just what the market is. You were probably right 5 days ago. So use our app and you'll be right every day. Maintain that positions of that omnipresent kind of knowledge that people believe, or at least they believe that they had to have. So in some subtle way, it was like, how do you make them continue to stay on the stool of which they put themselves on? A lot of psychology.
So Jack, I remember a moment, it must have been 2016 or 17. I was talking with Matt Brennan, who at the time was at Bain. He's like, hey man, you know anything about this company, ACV Auctions, that they just went from, I don't remember what it was, like 1 or 2 to 12 in the last year. And I was like, fuck me, man. Because I'd met you guys a year before, and I don't know, whatever, my partner, I don't even remember what happened. But what was could you describe what was that moment that it must have been some sort of unlock there?
No, look,
That's like AI growth.
yeah.
Yeah, no, seriously.
Look, I mean, I sit on a couple AI boards right now, but I think that's a whole nother conversation. We'll talk about that right after this, right? This is what I told people. I said, my grandfather used to plant tomatoes. He had tomato plants. And people go, where in the hell is the story going? I said, shut up. Just listen to me for a second, right? You put a tomato plant in the ground. If you sit there, you wait, nothing comes up, right? Eventually it sprouts. Eventually it starts making tomatoes. And it makes one, then it makes a couple, it makes a couple. And depending on how you take care of that plant, it'll make more and more and more. And it takes a while. But really, assuming environmental conditions are the same, tomato plants grow the same way. The thing is, it takes a lot of care in the beginning to get them going. And the question is, you got to believe it's going to happen before it starts happening enough, right? So all we said was ACV did not benefit from any type of exponential growth or any type of economy of scale once we hit a critical mass. And a critical mass was not very big. Again, what happened, the cars sold in Washington State do not matter to people that live in North Carolina by and large. It costs too much money to move cars. Think of it like $1 a mile. The margin's not that big for them being that far away. So within a region, a watershed as I would call it, you had to build up a critical mass. But the truth is, all that growth was just from fundamentally putting out these linear growth models, these tomato plants, inside each of these cities. You have a territory manager. The deal was you have to close 2 dealerships a month. That's it. One every 2 weeks. You got to get somebody one every 2 weeks to start using ACV. We did not mandate a lot of stuff around it. Ideally, that meant that we would sell 7.5 cars per dealership per month. Okay. Now, they might not start at 7.5, and that was a pretty low number, right? Dealerships are moving 30, 40, 50 wholesale units a given month. Some are moving 100. Some in Florida are moving like 500. Some in the town outside of the town I lived in, which was an even smaller farm town, moved like 2. Right? There was like a massive, but the idea was just keep putting the seeds in the ground. They will all start producing a yield. And if you look at it, it was phenomenally consistent. It was just, we hired more people and we retained our customers. That was it. There was no amazing network. Yeah. Did it help that people started to know who we were before we showed up? Yeah. But at the same time, we also started going to territories where we weren't the first digital auction going in. I would have rather been the only digital auction. No one knew where we were, had to educate everybody along the way, because the places that we were first are the places that they do the best in. The places we enter second are the places we do not do the best in. It is that easy. The logic is that simple. Your first love's your true love is what I used to tell people. So, but that was it. The unlock was, it looks giant, but that's because we just started hiring 4 or 5 territory managers at a time instead of one every 3 months. And then all of a sudden, look, I mean, was it a perfect straight line? No, it really looked more, it was low, and then it would cut up because, there was momentum within a market. I can go into all sorts of economic fun little drawings of the way things grew. And I could say it had to do with, behavioral economics. It had to do with, like bell curve effects. It had to do with all this different stuff. But the truth was, we just did something and we did it loud. We would show up at dealers and, show up and buy them a pizza. And if they throw you out, buy them a pizza the next day too. Like, just keep doing it because everyone's eventually going to try and use this, right? And guess what? I bet you, I haven't been in ACV in a while, but I guarantee the first territories we were in, which was Buffalo, Albany, Rochester, Syracuse, Binghamton, Scranton, like middle of nowhere, we're still absolutely the market leader in those. And I bet you they are still the halo accounts that everybody points to. If they were going to go raise money, they would point to that cohort again and say, look, this is what happens when you're there first, So, but that was it, man, and that's, I bet you when we start tearing apart, these AI native companies, it ain't a lot different. It's like, are they really making more money is their dollar of marketing really buying them that much more? Or is this, nobody pulls the cheese apart and really figures out what's going on between it. Like,
I remember reading your guys' S1 when it came out and thinking, this is a super interesting business model, but it feels like it's going to take a while to people really understand how this works. Like, I think Uber got so far in advance of talking about their geographic strategy that almost like the market understood it by that time. But it is kind of similar in a way, right?
Yeah, look, like Uber was going to evolve, originally it was, hey, I want a black car to show up and I got money. I had a little bit too much fun in the club and I really don't want to get a Dewey, right? Or my dad doesn't want me to get a Dewey, so he gives me money and I just, for this to happen. And then it went from that to, like anything else, it went from that to bigger cities. Look, I lived in New York, dude. Who was it? Was it Cuomo or Pataki? One of them, outside of New York City, didn't let ride sharing come here until not that long ago, 10 years ago.
I think it took until Bloomberg.
But the thing is, ACV fundamentally, now they're doing all sorts of different things, which I don't want to get into that because I'll sound like a grumpy old architect who somebody fucking painted the house they loved purple, right? But I think they got away from their fundamentals a little bit. Fundamentally, it's the same business. There's a lot of money tied up in something inefficient. We make it more efficient. We try and optimize user experience. The term trust and transparency is something that we kind of, I don't want to say coined because everybody has said it, but since the very beginning. And the idea is just to make it a very easy process. But it's not rocket science. That's why when we went public, I was like, I'm not going to say anybody because I own a whole bunch of stock of this thing, but this is a service business that's got technology on the outside of it and makes it run efficiently, right? We're never going to hit 70% margin in this business. Not even a 70% margin off the 4%, take rate or the rake that we took off it, and that's okay. It's also not going to get AI'd out of existence. It's not, all of a sudden, the guys that go and view cars. I'm an investor in, a couple technologies that use, other pieces of, optic base and other types of technologies to do car, condition scanning and stuff like that. But still, it's a human business. Marketplaces are still, until humans aren't making buying and selling decisions, they're human. You have to know the human psychology and the psychographic nature of everything.
So that's a perfect segue. For those who might not be familiar, Jack is also not just a marketplace founder, but a prolific investor. So you've got, huge perspective. What are you seeing in AI marketplaces? Is it changing things, as you just mentioned? In some cases, it's not. What's your view on the future marketplaces post LLM?
Okay, so I don't really use ChatGPT or large language models. I don't. I exclusively use them, ask stupid questions to. Well, I use them with, if my son wants something funny, then I ask it for something stupid and funny. But besides that, I just use it to remind me of things. It's like having a secretary. I'm where did I put where on the internet is the NVCA doc for this thing, right? So please realize that basically a Luddite when it comes to that. I don't know enough about AI the way everybody talks about it to know what the end state of it's going to be. I feel like that it's a science, and if I was to talk about it, it'd be me talking about thermodynamics, which I also understand. I like to get in a warm car in the winter, but that doesn't mean that I understand like heat transfusion and all that kind of stuff. So I don't pretend to do that. I think I'm at an advantage acknowledging this is a science that I don't know. I will tell you this. You know, now the way people talk about AI, I realize how many companies I've worked in the past that had the Cro-Magnon version of AI in it and just never knew how to productize or market the name correctly. Like, to me, this is what I think. As I just said, as long as humans are making decisions, everything is human based still. I will also note, like, it terrifies me when I see these things of like especially the visual AI of like, it's like a picture of Tom Cruise, but with like eagle's wings, like fighting like a velociraptor. It looks real. Like, I'm like, okay, this is crazy. But what I tend to focus on, like, again, I'm a bricks and mortar guy. I don't think I think AI does everything that's not at the ends, right? I think the ends, the relationships with the customer, the human aspect of things still exists. And AI just kind of shrinks all the work that happens in the middle and makes it really easy. It outsources it to some degree. And so I'll give you an example. Like, I sit on the board of a foundational AI company called Aikido. Super cool company. I have a passion for healthcare. I think it's an innate human right. We don't have enough doctors. We can't just call China and ask them to ship us another 10. We'll lift the tariffs to send 10 more boatloads over. And I think it's a very tough thing to diagnose, because I do truly believe, like, while you could be wearing your Fitbit and your Whoop and your Whip and whatever else, like, there's still a very human-centered component of being able to self-diagnose what's going on if you're in a trusted environment, right? We're going to go back to trust and transparency again. But Aikido is really interesting because it's the first real time that AI has greatly enhanced the ability for like a cardiologist to see more patients, and for those patients to have as good or if not better clinical outcomes, period. Like, early cohorts are like 3 times better, right?
What is it doing specifically, Jack, that's making that possible?
If you think of, this is for cognitive medicine. So
okay,
think of your mom or your grandparent going to the doctor. I used to be my grandmother's caregiver, and my mom's side of the family, my grandmother's side of the family, has a history of cardiac issues, right? She was in congestive heart failure for like 40 years and still lived to like 96. But it didn't help that, I mean, it didn't hurt. She was like 4 foot tall too. Like literally her heart just had to like move blood, like 1 cell's length, right? So, but what they did is they said, and again, I love these ridiculously simple things. I was just talking to the guys this morning about it. All right. The average visit at a cardiologist is 26 minutes. That's how much time it takes a cardiologist to get one more patient in. That includes coming in and having the initial conversation with the patient to figure out what's going on. They all have different ways of sussing out the information, taking that information, then running it across their own brain of what potentially, are there any issues? Are there any red flags? Deciding if those red flags are validated, again, going into the corpus and medical knowledge that's there, then making conclusion, diagnosis on what's going on. And then taking that and saying, well, I think it's X. I think you have congestive heart failure. And so because of that, here's the care plan that I think, given all your other factors and the way the wind's blowing and the fact that it's a Tuesday, that this is what we're going to do for a healthcare plan, and then sending you on your way. And then immediately having to do that again in a batch process, right? No one has figured out how to just like do like 1,000 visits at the exact same time. So what does Aikido do? It takes that, which is just a sequence of steps. It's a process. It breaks it up into individual steps. It identifies what those steps each are. And then it says, do I do this? Does the doctor do this? Does a medical concierge do this? Does an LLM rip through this? Do we build another piece of technology to evaluate it? And just like businesses that are thinking about using like an AI BDR agent, but like a human that's a salesperson, you're able to take the idea of care and you're able to say, well, maybe since I'm serving a large Burmese population, instead of me being, an Italian doctor from South Jersey with a nasty, like kind of demeanor, bad bedside manner, I can take that medical knowledge, enough of it, put it into a tablet, put that tablet in the hand of a young Burmese woman that's got, maybe was a barista at Starbucks and has great interpersonal skills, take that 26-minute meeting, of which the first 6 were figuring out what's going on, stretch it out to 40 minutes, let them ask you all the questions, surface all the things that could possibly be there. And then when the time of the doctor needs to come in, all that investigative work is done. That's the first part of it. It run against the potential things that could be there. That's at least outlined. And then there's lines crossed out why they might not be there. And then the doctor chooses, is there enough knowledge here? Is there enough information for me to be able to either, maybe the diagnosis is all but made. And by the way, if that is correct, here's the care plan based on what you prescribed in the past that's there. And they decide what they want to take off the shelf as a pre-made meal and what they want to say, no, I need to go in and talk to the patient about this one. It acts as a triage process. So in a day when the average cardiologist sees 14 patients, maybe 2 of them have complex cases, but you don't know which 2. And so it allows you to get through those. The ones that don't need as much, you're still there. You're still giving them the same level of care. You're allowed the doctor that can then spend more of their actual time on the complex cases. Plus you free up a bunch of bandwidth. You can go from 14 to 40 patients. You go from 14 to 40 patients. The complex ones get more doctor time. Everybody that does not need, everybody feels good about that because now
you get more revenue.
Yeah.
Right? The doctor's making more money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I want to sit down with somebody that I can communicate with because if I'm not open, honest, genuine, and direct, then there's no way for me to get the information. Maybe it takes 10 minutes for me to talk to you to say, I haven't had an erection in 3 months. I can't feel the bottom of my feet. I think I either got a zit on my back or it's a cancerous lump. Like, who knows? But the point is, you've got to get people to be open, honest, and transparent. And it all comes down to the UX, and the UX is human, right? So like, that's what I think. Those are the home run. I mean, I love Aikido. I invested in it. I'm on the board, right? I'm also biased because of all those reasons, but yeah, I think it's going to transform healthcare. I mean, we need 4 times the doctors to see everybody in the U.S. We're not going to invent those. Like, they're not going to lower the standards of what it takes to be a doctor. So let's just take the knowledge of being a doctor and just know where to put it. That's when I think of, but when I think of that, just to be clear, no one agrees with it. I'm like, that's blue collar, that's field service, that's like, it's not AI. AI is there that does a lot of the work, but it's a modern day version of regression analysis, right? Like, I know anybody that knows about AI is going to say I'm an idiot right now, which I am. And I admitted that at the beginning, but
I think it's kind of both. I mean, I think what LLMs enable that is most interesting, I mean, whether it's this example or marketplaces more generally, kind of comes down to that. I mean, if you think about that transparency, trust, transaction framework that a lot of people use for marketplaces, it is in that first part, because exactly what you described of like, okay, I maybe only talk to my GP like, I don't know, once a quarter. And when I do, it's a 30-minute conversation. What if that changed to where I could literally call, my AI version anytime, talk to them for 2 hours if I wanted to. And I still have the doctor for the like true trust part, but like that information surfacing, we can now do in a way we just couldn't before. So I kind of abstract this to, I don't know, maybe you're a retailer that's looking to figure out what you want to get for your fall collection, or you're, I don't know, like someone looking to buy a car. How does this change information sharing?
To me, the API that my data as a human plugs into is not a computer screen, because I don't know how to communicate cross species. I'm 41. Okay, like my son is 10. He's going to know how to do it. It's going to be way more native for him. But I'll tell you what, if you told me, here's a screen, tell us how you felt today, Jack. Like, I'm not going to be, I'm going to be like, get this out of me. Like, get this out of my face. But if there's, I mean, I'll go the full extreme, and I'm not saying this is what we're doing, but like, if there is a gorgeous woman that, even though I'm married, like, is fun to look at and talk to, like, think of like a bartender. Why do people go to the bars? They can drink at home. They go because they want the interaction. And what will they say to those people? They will say, it's not just the alcohol. They will pour it out. That's what you need. And I still think so. I think AI enables people to stop doing the mechanical functions and focus on the human functions of things. That's where I get really excited, because it's not, Skynet and like Terminators and like whatever else. It's, wow. Like, when people talk about a renaissance potentially happening, I don't think it's that everybody's going to turn into Da Vinci and Michelangelo. I think it's that people are going to be able to, for better or for worse, get to function more in what are normally the little moments of life where we get to be human. The jobs will become human jobs. We will become like the service industry, right? Waitresses are still going to be waitresses, and they're still going to get great tips if they know how to take care of somebody. But like, the AI version of what goes on in the back room is that everything's pre-ordered. We don't throw anything else. There's robots making the food. Like, it doesn't matter. The front of the house is going to stay the same. The back of the house is going to change.
I think and Luke, I want to get your view too, but I think I agree with that point that I think over time jobs are going to get more human because that's what we're good at. But here's an interesting anecdote, and I may have mentioned on the pod before, so sorry listeners if this is repetitive, but have you guys tried Bordy? That thing that you can call and then it talks to you and makes intros?
No.
Check it out, Bordy.ai, right? It's kind of I don't know what they're building into, but it's kind of a fun thing. You talk to it, it asks you about your background, and then it tries to just make intros to other people to talk to. You can just call it. And I think what I found was I probably ended up talking more to that thing than I would have if someone I didn't know called me and said, hey, tell me what kind of intros do you want? You know why? Because I wasn't worried about offending it. I wasn't worried about its time. Its interest in me is unlimited. And now when it tries to make an intro and I say no, and then it says, oh yeah, I remember you said 18 months ago, you said this one thing. Like, the memory is infinite, right? So which is
also terrifying, but
it is definitely terrifying. But like, when I think about who do I trust to make it better intros for me, Bordy or someone I just met 10 minutes ago, it's going to be Bordy, because I've told it a lot and it remembers absolutely everything I've ever told it. So I wouldn't trust it to deliver care to me for healthcare, but to intake information, I would.
So, when I think of the bell curve, where do you think you are on the bell curve? I mean, you're a VC on a podcast about AI. Okay. So just to be clear, you're probably a little ahead at the time, right? I mean, this is where, I'm like, literally I have a mirror next to me, and I don't look in the mirror to see how I look. I look in the mirror to be like, that's who you are. Like, don't forget it. Right. So, and the truth is, I think but again, there's a place and a time for everything. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that it makes a lot of sense why in that given interface, given who you are, I would look at it and I'd be like, oh yeah, Nick told me about this thing. The chances of me actually looking at Bordy AI, and this has no disrespect to you, are about 0%. Right. So, right. So
I don't blame
right.
you.
No, but all I'm saying is like, I think that is very interesting. The question is, and I don't do as much on the consumer side. There's a reason I should have said this. I primarily live in a B2B world because I think humans are fickle, and I have no idea how to market to actual humans, or, capture them. Where a business I can understand. Businesses tend to be more like logical, right? It's like, okay, like we're not just jumping from platform to platform every single day, right? And so I would wonder if the business version of you, your business mind, right, your operator mind, how long it would take for you to accept something like that. Like, for example, like if somebody was trying to reproduce ACV and they were going to use a piece of AI that remembered everything, would they, personally they may like that, but would they trust it business-wise? Because again, I think trust comes down to a different thing. For every story I heard about what you told, I've heard stories of like people building like malicious AI that like try and talk people into killing themselves, right? You know how if you were my kid and you were talking to this piece of AI all the time, if it's a little Bobby from down the street, it's missing a tooth and it's chewing bubble gum, and I know his dad takes him out, right? I'd be like, it's okay. But I'm like, oh my God, am I talking to this thing that's like manipulating my child's mind, right? This precious, malleable thing.
With infinite wisdom and knowledge.
Right. Owned by who? Owned by somebody behind a dark curtain in another place, right?
Yeah, a very good question. Well, Jack, we're getting towards time. Let me ask one more, and then Luke will round us out with a final question. But
sure,
maybe just I'll let everyone come out of my science fiction moment here and zoom back out to the real world. Like, you've invested in a bunch of marketplaces. What is exciting you right now, and has that changed with AI, or is it really just the same, like underappreciated markets? Verticals.
I think the companies. Okay, I like traditional business. I find a lot of joy in things people would find boring. Right. I mean, if you think of the companies that I'm spending the most time with, that I'm the most excited about, like, we just did a Series A, super excited about it over at PestShare. Right. I think I showed you guys that a while ago. Yeah. Pest remediation. Think of it like extermination as a subscription for single family rentals. Is they're very narrow. I'm big on narrow, deep wedges. It's their narrow, deep wedge, right? Pest remediation. So you pay a monthly fee, and if the bug's on the list, you could buy a short list, medium list, long list, a bug's covered. Bug's on the list. All you got to do is make a phone call or take a picture. There's a bunch of ways to submit it. Somebody shows up, takes care of it. No problem. No extra charge. Boom. You pay Netflix, directly through your landlord, through your benefits package, you pay for PestShare. Right now we're going through this thought process. I was just with them in Vegas. We're sitting down with our new investors, IGP, which is a cool group out of LA, growth investors, great guys. And we're talking through it, and we're like, okay, how are we going to use AI, right? Like, how are we going to use this? Like, we have 70 employees. We just raised a bunch of money. We can go hire a bunch of people, but let's be thoughtful on where it goes and where it doesn't. And it's so great. I mean, I'm working so closely with them because I miss building stuff, obviously. And it's just so fun to look at this now as a former founder in somebody else's company and be like, oh, look at all these new toys. Like, how do we play with them? Where do you put them in? I would have been excited about PestShare 5 years ago. I would have been excited about them 10 years ago. Could have happened 5 or 10 years ago. It happened to happen now. So the same things excite me, but now I get to ask, the cocktail conversation is, well, how will this affect, the way we do our service requests, and will allow us to have different views into, better unit economics long term, and stuff like that. Things are changing faster now. I feel like, I think that's just the thing. So, the keto that I talked about, without AI, it would not be as exciting of a play. It's the same kind of stuff. It really is the same kind of stuff. A really good friend of mine, Colin Hurd, CEO of Mock.io. Colin just did a raise backed by the Venture Collective. Cat over there is great VC to work with. He's got, his last company was it was a hardware product that bolted onto a combine, and like a agricultural combine, and gave it some base level of autonomy. And he said, you know what? We should do this at the OEM level. And Mock's doing it primarily in ag, but they're doing it in mining, in lawn care, in maritime, anything that's not on a road, like a human road. They're having this full stack autonomy product, right? That, for a marketplace guy, I find that very interesting. Again, I come from an ag background, so it allows anybody to create. So I do think it's cool, but I also think it is, first thing I ask myself is, if this is an AI play, how quickly is it going to get out AI'd by somebody else's player, right?
Yeah, totally. Is it defensible?
Yeah, it's like my son loved that movie Cars when he was young, right? And there's the hot rod red car, and then the next version there's one that looks like a sweet badass James Bond Transformer car, and you're like, how quick until my model gets outdated, I get outdated. And I think when you're I love things that are blue collar and field service. And I don't think those are changing. So for me, it's just giving me a different vantage point. I now need to look at stuff through before I make a decision.
Well, I'll round us out here, Jack, with a final question, if that works for you.
Yeah, please.
one of the hardest parts about marketplace is you're basically, have a go-to-market process on both sides, right? So you're trying to get users on both sides of that. I'm curious if you have any tips, tricks, hacks for the audience that are maybe in their early days of building marketplace, like unique things that you can't read on a blog post or that an AI will tell you that you guys may have deployed, or a company that you're, invested in may have deployed that really moved the needle.
So I don't believe in this world that they're perfectly equal and they need to get done at the same time. Everything I look at as a marketplace. I walk down the street that 20 years ago I would be, banging on the door to get into a bar because of the girls that were in there. That's a marketplace, right? You have an establishment. How are you going to get the guys and girls in there? It's not that you try to get them at the same time. You have cheap drinks, the ones that girls like, they come in, then guys want to go in there, right? Like it's a marketplace, right? I'm doing an event next week in Buffalo, right? Like I got 7 VCs coming in from around the US. How did I get them to all fly to Buffalo? Well, we have companies here, but the companies want the VCs. The VCs maybe want to see the companies, but they really want to raise money so they can go into companies from anywhere. The investors want to see that there's founders there. So it's like a triangle, and you just have to kind of it's setting up a house of cards, man. Like for a marketplace founder, I'd say there's always one that has to be the dominant driver. And there's one that you have to find a way to coax along, maybe even outside your business model to create demand, right? One of my best friends, my biggest angel investment in somebody else's company to date was TCG Player. It was a marketplace for collectible trading cards, right? So
super cool
yeah,
company.
It was a cool company. Couldn't get a damn person to do our Series B, so we ended up selling to eBay. Chetty should still be running it. Whole nother podcast. But in that example, it's like, well, okay, like how do you get people to put cards onto a platform and then have people buy them? Well, the whole company started by them writing blogs about cool strategies. And then they actually secured the cards, of which they started to sell. And when people were buying them, they're like, well, why should we be in an inventory game? Let's let other people sell them on there. And so you hot wire the marketplace. There's always a hot wire. There's always a cheap drinks for ladies. There's always I'll get a bunch of people with money here so that the investors will want to come, so the founders will want to come. There's always we'll sell our own cards. And then, there's always the Zappos story of running around and buying, there's always a hot wire story, and you got to figure out what your hot wire trick is to make the whole thing go, right? Your starter only has to fire when the car starts. You need a starter in order to get the cycle of the engine running. The starter may look completely different than, if I have a starter and an engine, they don't look anything alike, but you need one to get the other one going. So I never think that it's both at the same time. There is some hot wire, there's some starter, there's some kicker that needs to go on to make the revolution start happening. And then network effect is the centripetal rotation of everything. It's the volley, but a serve looks different than every other part of volleyball. It does. Yeah. Pitch looks different than every other part of baseball. In order to get the thing going, it looks different. And I tell people,
I love that. Hot wire. Find your hot wire.
Yeah.
It's good.
You've just given us about 16 quotable bits that we can we'll be reusing. Awesome. Well, Jack, this was so much fun chopping it up with you here as always. So thank you for taking the time.
I love it, man.
Yeah. This is a blast. So thanks again.
You guys are definitely worth spending time with. I appreciate what you're doing.
Thanks, Jack. Good to meet you, man. It's a pleasure.
All right. Take it easy, guys.
Yeah, Jack. We'll catch up soon. Take care, man.
All right. Jack is awesome. Nick, thanks for bringing him on the pod. ACV Auctions, killer business. I think a lot of people have heard about it, but don't know the intricacies. So it was super fascinating for me to just get a better handle on it. And yeah, a lot of fascinating playbooks, kind of tips, tricks. I think my favorite playbook is this hot wiring, and his view of everything is a marketplace. I had a complete different view because I haven't done marketplaces personally, where you got two go to markets, and he doesn't look at it like that at all. So super fascinating. Tons of value there. So, we'll be back next week as always. And I want to give a quick shout out to Paraffin. Paraffin's made our podcast possible. They provide ready to launch financial products to help your merchants grow. If you're a vertical software business, if you haven't checked out Paraffin, go do that. Really drives retention, revenue, and TAM for founders. So big shout out to Paraffin as always. And Nick, good seeing you, my friend. Good sparring with you, and look forward to it again next week.
As always, see you next week.